After 11 years of catching people who forge other people's signatures for a living, I finally quit, took what was left of my divorce settlement, and bought a cedar lodge on the north shore of Lake Coeur. Nobody in my family knew where it was. That was the whole point. And then, on my first night there, sitting on the deck in a canvas chair with the chipped mug of tea, my phone buzzed with my mother's name. "We closed on the house today," Loretta said, "the way you'd mentioned the weather. Your father and I move in Saturday. Your brother handled everything." I told her I didn't understand. I said it slowly, twice because my mouth had gone strange. She laughed. That little three-note laugh she uses at church potlucks. "Maren, honey, don't be difficult. It's got 4 bedrooms. We're taking the one that faces the water, obviously. And if you don't care for the arrangement, you're a grown woman. Find somewhere else to live." My hands started shaking. Not from fear. I want to be clear about that because I've thought about it for 2 years now and I know the difference. It was the shake you get when your body figures something out before your brain does. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I looked down at the folder on the deck table beside my tea, the closing binder, still with the escrow company's rubber band around it, and I heard myself say, "Okay, Mom, drive safe." Then I hung up and I smiled at the black water, and I started making a list. Before I get into it, tell me where you're listening from. I always want to know. And if anybody in your family has ever treated your life like a spare room they were entitled to, hit like and stay with me, because this one goes places. My name is Maren Hale. I was 39 years old that summer. For 11 years, I worked as a senior fraud investigator for a title insurance underwriter out of Denver, which is a job most people have never heard of and cannot picture. Here is what it means. When somebody buys a house, an insurance company promises them that the chain of ownership is clean, that no forgotten heir, no forged signature, no phantom lien is going to crawl out of a filing cabinet in 10 years and take the house away. When that promise turns out to be wrong, the company pays, and before they pay, they send me. I spent a decade reading deeds, warranty deeds, quitclaims, deeds of trust. I learned what a notary's stamp looks like when the commission expiration has been altered with a laser printer. I learned that forgers almost always get the acknowledgement language wrong because they copy it off a template from a different state. I learned that a person who steals a house is not usually a criminal mastermind. Usually he's somebody's son who owes money. The job paid well. It also ate me. 14-hour days, red-eye flights to Phoenix and Tampa, and a marriage that quietly dried out around me until my husband and I were 2 polite people sharing a mortgage. When we finally sat down with the mediator, there was nothing to fight about. We'd already lost it. I got the condo's equity, half the retirement accounts, and my last name back, which I'd never changed anyway. What I did not get any relief from was my family. My father is Wendell Hale, 71, retired regional manager for a commercial flooring distributor, a man who wore a tie to Applebee's and believed that a firm handshake was a personality. My mother is Loretta Hale, 68, a former piano teacher who has spent her entire adult life performing a version of gentility she saw in a magazine once. And then there is my brother, Dashiell Hale. Everyone calls him Dash. 42 years old, 6'2", easy laugh, expensive shoes. He had a real estate license once. In Colorado, back when the market was so hot, a golden retriever could have closed a deal. He let it lapse in 2019 and never told my parents. Since then, he'd been a consultant. Then he was in crypto. Then he was in short-term rental arbitrage. Then in something involving a nutritional supplement. Then back in crypto. 2 bankruptcies. One of them Chapter 7 in 2016. He is charming in the way that people who never face consequences are charming. Dash was the son. I was the plan. That's not bitterness. That's the actual arithmetic. When I was 26 and Dash lost $11,000 on a seed round, my mother called me at work and cried until I wired it. When I was 31, my father took out a home equity line to cover Dash's tax lien and then asked me to make the payments and framed it as an opportunity for me to contribute to the family. When I was 34 and my marriage was audibly cracking, my mother's only advice was that I should be more understanding because my husband worked hard, and because Dash had a big year coming, and it would be a shame if I embarrassed the family with a divorce. By the time I was 38, I had put roughly $190,000 into my brother's life. I know the number because I audit things. I've always known the number. So when the divorce closed and the condo sold and I had a check in my hand for the first real money of my own I'd ever held, I did what I know how to do. I disappeared myself. I found the lodge on a Tuesday in March, on a drive I took just to be moving. It sits on 11/10 of an acre on the North Shore, half a mile down a private gravel road, and it was built in 1974 by a doctor from Spokane who apparently loved cedar the way some men love boats. Post and beam frame. A wall of glass facing the water. A river rock chimney breast, running 2 stories up the middle of the house like a spine. Fir floors that had gone the color of honey. It smelled like wood smoke and cold stone, even in the spring. It cost $1,240,000 cash. It took everything I had, and it left me with about $90,000 in the bank, and a plan to consult part-time from a desk by the window. I did not buy it in my name. Of course I didn't. I formed an Idaho limited liability company. I called it Wintersedge Holdings. My attorney's office served as the registered agent. On the public record, on the county assessor's site, on Zillow, on anything a curious person could pull up on a phone, the owner of that house was a corporation with no faces attached to it. As far as the world was concerned, I was a tenant, a woman renting a nice place from an entity. I told exactly 2 people, my attorney and my dog, and one of them can't talk. I loaded a U-Haul, drove 1,100 miles with Otis, my 7-year-old bloodhound mix, drooling into the passenger seat, and I moved into the quietest place I had ever been. That first night the lake was so flat it looked like something you could walk out onto. Loons were calling somewhere in the dark. That sound like a question nobody answers. I made tea. I sat in the canvas chair. I thought unironically the actual sentence. Nobody knows I'm here. 3 hours and 11 minutes. That's how long that lasted. After I hung up on my mother, I didn't move for a while. Otis put his head on my knee. Somewhere out on the water, an outboard motor started, ran for maybe 30 seconds, and stopped. Here is what I was actually thinking about, sitting there. I wasn't thinking, how dare she? I'd stopped being surprised by my mother sometime around the Clinton administration. I was thinking, how did they find me? Because the LLC was clean. I built it. The address on the deed was my attorney's office in Boise. My mail went to a box in Hayden. I had never posted a photograph. I had never geotagged anything. I had told the Postal Service and nobody else. And even if they'd found the town, even if some cousin had seen my car, my mother had not said we're coming to visit. She had said with total confidence, we closed on the house today. Closed. That's an escrow word. That's a word people use when money has moved. I called Dash. He picked up on the 4th ring, and I could hear a restaurant behind him. Hey sis, delighted, bright. Mom call you? Dash. What did you do? What did I do? He laughed. I did what nobody else in this family has the vision to do. Mom and Dad were sitting on 900 grand of dead equity in a split level in Longmont. Dead. I moved it into an appreciating asset on a lake. Whose asset theirs? A pause, and then that voice he uses, warm and slightly disappointed in you. Maren, come on. You've been renting that place, what, a week? I know you like it. I get it. But they're your parents and they're retiring and there's 4 bedrooms. Dashiell. I made my voice very flat. Say the sentence out loud. What did you buy them? I bought them the house. Cash. Closed Thursday. It's recorded, Maren. He was enjoying himself. I could hear it. You can go look it up yourself. Kootenai County, it's public. And I understood. He hadn't rented them a house. He hadn't found them a house. He had taken the house I was standing in, a house owned by a corporation, whose name he had somehow learned. And he had made a piece of paper that said the corporation sold it to Wendell and Loretta Hale for $980,000. And he had walked that piece of paper into the county recorder's office and paid the $20 fee, and now it existed in the permanent public record of the state of Idaho. I want you to understand what that means, because most people don't, and my brother was counting on that. Recording a deed does not make it true. A forged deed is a forged deed. But recording it makes it look true to everyone who isn't a judge. It creates what the law calls a presumption. When a sheriff's deputy stands in your kitchen at 9 in the morning and one party has a certified copy of a recorded warranty deed with a notary seal on it, and the other party has a woman in a bathrobe saying, "No, actually, I own this through an LLC," the deputy is not going to unrecord a deed. He can't. That's a court's job, and courts take months. My brother had spent his whole life being handed things. He had finally learned to take one, and he had learned it well enough to be dangerous. I asked him one more question. "How did you find the LLC?" He hesitated for the first time. "Just a beat." Then, easy again. "Google's a hell of a thing." It wasn't Google. I figured it out 4 days later, and I'll tell you when we get there. I hung up and I sat down at my kitchen island and I opened my laptop and I pulled the Kootenai County Recorder's Index. And there it was, filed at 2:41 p.m. on Thursday. Instrument number, book page. Grantor, Wintersedge Holdings LLC. Grantee, Wendell R. Hale and Loretta J. Hale, husband and wife, and a signature line above my printed name with my title beneath it, Maren Hale, managing member. Except that wasn't my signature. My M has a closed loop. Whoever drew that one had opened it. I looked at the notary block for a long time. Curtis Yandel, commission number, expiration date, and the acknowledgement language underneath, the little paragraph nobody reads, said personally known to me or proved to me on the basis of satisfactory evidence. Idaho doesn't use that phrasing, California does. He had pulled a template off the internet and hadn't even changed the state. I sat back on my stool. Otis sighed and lay down on my foot. Out on the deck my tea had gone cold. 11 years. 11 years of my life, sitting in fluorescent conference rooms in cities I don't remember, reading documents exactly like this one, written by men exactly like my brother. I got up. I got a legal pad, and I made the list I've never in my life regretted making. They came at 9:40 on Saturday morning. I heard them before I saw them, a 26-foot box truck grinding down a gravel road it had no business being on, and behind it my father's Buick, and behind that a black Escalade my brother had definitely leased. I was standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and my phone already recording, because I'd been awake since 4. My mother got out of the Buick in white linen pants and stood in the driveway with her hands on her hips, surveying, the way a general surveys a hill. My father was already at the truck's roll-up door, and Dash came up the flagstone path with a leather portfolio under his arm, took the 3 steps to the deck and did not knock. Sizz, arms out, like it was Thanksgiving. I didn't move. My hand was on Otis's collar. Otis, who is a coward, growled anyway, which I've never forgotten him for. "You have to be out today," my mother said, coming up behind him. She wasn't cruel about it. That was the worst part. She said it the way you'd tell a waiter about a wrong order. "We've been very patient. Your father's back can't take a hotel." My father was already carrying a box up the steps. It said kitchen, good dishes. "Dad," I said, "please don't bring that in here." He set it down in my entryway. He didn't look at me. He has never once, in 39 years, looked at me during a conflict. "Maren," Dash said, opening the portfolio, "I don't want this to be ugly. Take a bag. I'll wire you $2,000 for a deposit somewhere. We'll call it square." That's when I called the sheriff, yes. Me. I called them. And I need to stop here because this is the part where people get angry with me. I've heard it. Why didn't you fight? Why didn't you throw them out? You had documents. You had a lawyer. You had a spine. I know. I know. So let me tell you exactly what happened in the 11 minutes between the sheriff's dispatch and the deputy's arrival. I called my attorney. Rosalind Adeyemi is 53 years old, a real estate litigator in Coeur d'Alene, and before that she spent 9 years as a deputy prosecutor in Ada County. I had hired her to Fort her sedge, and she had charged me $800, and told me I was smarter than most of her clients. She picked up on the second ring at 9:47 on a Saturday morning, which is the single best money I have ever spent. I put her on speaker. I set the phone on the kitchen island, screen up, between my brother and me, and I said, "Roz, tell me what I'm allowed to do." Her voice came out of that little speaker into my cedar and glass living room with my mother standing in it, and it was calm and it was terrible. "Maren, is the deed recorded?" "Yes, then right now, on the face of the public record, they own that house and you don't. Your interest is in a corporation and corporations are invisible until a judge looks at them." A breath. "Listen to me carefully. Do not touch anyone. Do not block a doorway. Do not raise your voice at a deputy. When he asks, you tell him this is a civil matter. You understand it's a civil matter, and you are leaving voluntarily." My brother started smiling. "Roz's Maren." She let it land. "You have spent 11 years building cases against people who did what your brother did. You know how those cases are built. Nobody ever gets convicted of intending to steal a house. They get convicted of what they do after they think they've gotten away with it." The smile went off my brother's face, like someone had flipped a switch. "Every hour they spend in that house," Roz said, "is an hour of evidence. Every dollar they spend is a count. Let them have it. Take the dog, take your hard drives." "And Maren, do you have cameras?" "Yes. Are they disclosed?" "There's a sticker on the front door. Idaho's one-party consent for audio, and I'm a party to everything that gets said in my own house." I heard her exhale, and I swear to God she laughed. "Then leave the man his stage. Call me tonight." The deputies rolled in 4 minutes later, 2 of them. Ochoa, who was maybe 30, and Brennan, who was tired. My father did his handshake. My mother pressed her fingertips to her collarbone and explained, with genuine tears, that her daughter had recently lost her job and her marriage, that she'd been going through a difficult psychological time, that she'd been staying at this property that her generous son had just purchased for them, and that she was refusing to leave, and that they were heartbroken, just heartbroken. Dash handed over the certified copy. Deputy Brennan opened it and read it the way you read a menu. "Ma'am, is this deed accurate?" "No, sir," I said. "That deed is a forgery. The signature is not mine. The notary block is copied from a California form. The grantor is a company I am the sole member of, and I have never conveyed this property to anyone." Brennan looked at the paper, then at me, then at the paper. He was, I understood, a patrol deputy on a Saturday morning at a lake house, and he had exactly 0 authority to void an instrument recorded in the public records of Kootenai County, and he knew it, and I knew it, and my brother knew it. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter." "I understand," I said. "I'd like it on your body camera that I'm leaving voluntarily, that I'm not being evicted, and that I object to the validity of that instrument." He blinked. "Deputies aren't used to that." "Noted," he said. I clipped Otis's leash. I picked up the black Pelican case with my drives in it, and my laptop bag and a duffel I had packed at 5 that morning. My mother watched me do it with an expression I'd need a whole other story to describe. Something like relief. Something like triumph. She had been waiting my whole life for someone official to agree with her about me. At the door, I stopped. I took my house key off the ring. The brass one, the original, the one the doctor from Spokane must have carried, and I set it on the entry table on top of a piece of paper. Dash picked it up. He read it out loud because of course he did. "Make yourselves at home." He laughed. He actually laughed, and my mother laughed, and my father looked at the floor. Deputy Ochoa walked me to my car. At the driver's door, he said quietly, not looking at me, "You're a real estate person, aren't you?" "Something like that." "Yeah," he said. And then, "Take care, ma'am." And he tapped the roof of my Subaru twice, the way you do, and walked back up to the house where my family was already unloading a sectional sofa the color of a Band-Aid. I did not go to a hotel. I want to say that because I've read enough of these stories to know how they usually go. With somebody sipping a $40 cocktail in a suite they can't afford while their house burns. I drove 3/4 of a mile down the shore road and pulled into a gravel turnaround in front of a small brown house with a wooden loon on the mailbox, and I knocked, and Estelle Pruitt opened the door. Estelle was 78. Her husband Ray had been dead 11 years. She had brought me a zucchini bread on my second day and stayed for 2 hours and told me the entire romantic history of the North Shore since 1961. She had a landline. She had a wood stove. She had, in her spare room, a twin bed with a chenille bedspread and a framed photo of a boy in a Little League uniform. She looked at me, and at Otis, and at the duffel bag, and she stepped back and opened the door wider and said, "Kitchen table. I'll put the kettle on." I stayed with Estelle Pruitt for 23 days. Here is what I did in those 23 days. I set up 2 monitors on her dining room table. I logged into the camera system I'd installed the week I moved in. 4 exterior, 2 interior, all disclosed, all mine, all recording to a server in Boise that my brother did not know existed. And I watched. I watched my mother tell a landscaping crew from Post Falls to tear out 11 mature serviceberry shrubs because they looked like weeds. I watched my father hang a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with a state senator in the exact spot where the afternoon light comes through the water and lands on the floor. I watched them put the good dishes in the wrong cabinet. And on day 9 at 11:20 in the morning, I watched my father and my brother walk into the living room carrying sledgehammers. I need you to understand something about that house. That river rock chimney breast running up the middle, it wasn't decoration. Post and beam construction from 1974 in that part of Idaho, with a masonry mass like that, tied into the ridge beam. There was a cedar knee wall on either side of it, and the whole assembly, chimney and knee walls, and the beam it carried, was holding up the second floor, and about 40 feet of roof that has to survive 120 pounds per square foot of snow load. You cannot take that out. Not with a sledgehammer, not with a permit, not without a structural engineer, and 2 steel columns and about $60,000. My mother stood off to the side, clapping her hands together. I could hear her through the camera mic. "Open it up," she said. "I want to see the water from the stove." Swung first. I have watched that footage more times than is healthy. The head of the hammer went into the cedar, and the sound came out of my laptop speakers like a bone breaking. A hole opened. Behind it, you could see the framing, and the framing was doing a job. My father swung next, and he was 71, and he still put his hole back into it, and a chunk of 100-year-old cedar the size of a car door came off the wall and dropped, and plaster dust went up in a cloud and settled on the honey-colored floor and on my mother's white linen pants. And she laughed and said, "Oh, Wendell." I did not cry. I want to say I did, because that would make me sound like a Wisconsin. But what I actually did was reach over and press the key that takes resolution still, and then I typed a timestamp into a spreadsheet, and then I did it again and again and again. 41 screenshot, 9 minutes of continuous 4K video with audio, of 2 men committing what the state of Idaho calls malicious injury to property, on a structure they had obtained by forged instrument, while a third person cheered. At one point, the ceiling aced sound. A low, unhappy sound, wood taking on a load it had not agreed to. My father looked up. My brother said, "That's just it settling," and swung again. They thought they were renovating. They were confessing. Estelle brought me a cup of coffee around noon and stood behind my chair and looked at the screen for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "That your mother?" "Yes, She set the cup down. I raised 54 years I've been somebody's mother. She was quiet a moment. "Motherhood isn't an invoice, honey. It's a gift you hand over and you don't get to ask what it cost. If your mother's been sending you a bill your whole life," she patted my shoulder twice and went back to her kitchen, "then it was never love. It was layaway." I have thought about that sentence every single day since. Now, the money. $980,000. That's what my parents wired. I know because on day 4 Estelle drove me to a UPS store. And I overnighted a records request. And because my mother, God help her, had emailed me the closing statement back in the springs as a kind of look what your brother did for us trophy, and I had never opened it, and it was still sitting in my archive folder. I opened it that night at Estelle's dining room table, with a glass of her terrible sherry beside me. It was a beautiful document, genuinely. Dash had built it in a spreadsheet, and it had a logo on it, and it had line items. Title insurance premium, escrow fee, recording fee, prorated taxes. It looked exactly like the real thing. It was the work of a man who had sat in enough close slicing to know the shape of one without ever understanding what any of it was for. The wire instructions at the bottom directed $980,000 to an account at a bank in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in the name of Kestrel Ridge Ventures LLC. There was no escrow, there was no title company, there was no closing. There was a checking account in Wyoming, a state that lets you form an LLC without ever putting a human name on the public record, opened 11 weeks before my parents sold the split level in Longmont they had lived in for 31 years. I sat there and I read that line 4 or 5 times, and something in my chest did a slow, ugly turn. My brother had not stolen a house from me. He had stolen $980,000 from them. From Wendell and Loretta, from the flooring man and the piano teacher, from their entire retirement, the whole thing, every dollar. He'd needed a house to point at, so they'd wire the money, and my house was the one he could find. And if they moved into it and I fought them in civil court for 2 years, that was fine, because by then he'd be gone, and the money would be gone, and I would be the villain of the story. He hadn't picked my house because he wanted to hurt me. He'd picked it because I was the only person in the family he was sure would never be believed. I went and stood on Estelle's back step in the dark for a while. Otis came out and leaned against my leg. Across the water, 3/4 of a mile down, I could see the lights of my house, and they were all on, everyone. Because nobody in that house had ever paid an electric bill they didn't expect somebody else to cover. I'm going to tell you the 3 things, because they saved me, and they might save you. 1. If a deed conveys property out of an entity, somebody had to sign for the entity, and that signature has to match a person who actually had authority on the date of signing. Pull the entity's annual report from the Secretary of State. Compare dates. Forgers get the dates wrong constantly. 2. Read the notary acknowledgement. Not the seal, the paragraph. Every state has its own required words. When somebody copies a form off the internet, they copy the words too. A California acknowledgement on an Idaho deed is a confession printed in 8-point type. 3. Follow the money to the escrow. A real sale has a real escrow account at a real title company with a real file number, and you can call them on a Monday morning and they will answer. A fake sale has wire instructions. If the money went to an LLC's checking account instead of an escrow trust account, there was never a sale. There was only a wire. That's it. Those 3 things took my brother apart. I called Rosalind Adeyemi at 6:40 the next morning, and she told me to be in her office at 8:30 and to bring everything. Her office is above a fly shop on Sherman Avenue. She wore a rust-colored blazer, and she did not offer me coffee, and she did not ask how I was holding up. She said, "Sit, show me." I put the drive on her desk. I walked her through it, forged signature, California acknowledgement. Notary Curtis Yandel, whose commission, I'd found, had been suspended once in 2021 for improper journal entries. $980,000 to a Wyoming shell. And then, because Dash had thought crypto was invisible, because he was 42 and had read 6 articles, a transfer out of that Wyoming account to an exchange, and out of the exchange to a self-custody wallet, in 3 transactions, on-chain forever, in public, where anyone with $300 and a subpoena and 11 years of experience can watch it move like a car with its headlights on. Roz was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her desk phone. "I'm calling the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boise," she said. "This is wire fraud. 2 counts, minimum. Maybe mail fraud. And the notary's going to fold in about 90 seconds, because notaries always do." She paused, receiver against her shoulder. "Maren. 1 question, and I need the true answer. Do you want your parents charged? I thought about my father, refusing to look at me in my own doorway. My mother, telling a sheriff's deputy that I was mentally ill. No, I said. They didn't know. They're marks. They're marks who called the police on you. Yeah, I said. They're both. Roz nodded slowly and dialed. 3 days later, Maren Hale called me. Simone is my brother's wife. She was 40 at the time. She teaches high school chemistry in Boulder. And for 12 years I had known her as a quiet woman who passed the potatoes and endured my mother. We had never once had a real conversation. I found a bank statement in his gym bag, she said. Flat, no preamble. Kestrel Ridge, I Googled it. It's registered in Wyoming. I didn't say anything, Maren. Her voice cracked and then got very steady. Is that my kids' college money? It was. 211,000 of it moved in November. Simone was in Roz's office the next afternoon with a box of tax returns. Here's something I want to be precise about, because a lot of people get this wrong. Simone did not serve Dash with divorce papers herself. She couldn't. In Idaho, a party to an action cannot serve process. It has to be a disinterested adult over 18, or a sheriff, or a licensed process server. Roz was very clear about it. Do it wrong, and you hand the other side a procedural gift. So Simone hired a process server, a soft-spoken retired mail carrier named Danny Weeks who charged $85 plus mileage, and who, when Roz explained the timing she wanted, said only, I've never done one at a party before. Because there was going to be a party, my mother sent the invitation to 61 people. A group text. I know it was 61 because she added my number. Wendell and I are just so blessed, she wrote, over a photo of my deck, my chair, my lake. Our brilliant son Dashiell has secured us the most magnificent lakefront estate. 2.4 million, and he negotiated it to a steal. Champagne and hors d'oeuvre, Saturday the 14th, 2 p.m. 2.4. My father had inflated it by nearly $1 million for an audience of his golf league. The replies came in for 2 days. Congratulations. So proud. Dash you dog. My Aunt Bev, who had never once called me after my divorce, sent 4 exclamation points. And then on Thursday night, my mother sent one more, to all 61 people, and she tagged my number so that my phone lit up in Estelle Pruitt's dark spare bedroom at 9:14 p.m. So sad Maren can't join us. She's between homes at the moment. The career didn't work out, and neither did the marriage, bless her heart. Praying she lands on her feet. But Saturday is about celebrating Dashiell's success. I lay in that twin bed under the chenille bedspread with my dog on the floor, and I read it 11 times. Bless her heart. I got up. I walked into the kitchen in the dark. Estelle was sitting at her table in a housecoat with a cup of decaf because she was 78 and she didn't sleep much anymore. And she looked at my face and she said, Well, Saturday, I said. Good, said Estelle Pruitt. Wear something they'll remember. I wore a red dress. I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling you what happened. I parked at Estelle's and we walked the shore road together, the two of us, at 2:40 p.m. on Saturday the 14th. With Roz Adeyemi 100 yards behind us carrying a banker's box, and Danny Weeks somewhere in the trees in a windbreaker. And Maren Hale in her car at the top of the gravel drive, and Otis on a leash pulling toward home. There were 40-some people on my deck. There was a rented white tent. A caterer's van sat in the flower bed where my service berries had been. Somebody was playing a Bluetooth speaker. Through the wall of glass I could see straight into my own living room, and the hole in it, black and ragged, with a blue tarp stapled over the worst of it. My father saw me first. He had a champagne flute in one hand and his mouth opened and nothing came out. My mother turned. Maren, she said brightly to 60 people. Oh, honey. I said Saturday was for family, and I said, I know. That's why I brought the deed. Roz set the banker's box on the outdoor table and opened it and started laying things out, and she said them out loud, one at a time, in the clear, carrying voice of a woman who spent 9 years talking to juries. Certificate of Organization, Wintersedge Holdings LLC, State of Idaho. Certified Operating Agreement, Sole Member, Maren Hale. Original Warranty Deed, Kootenai County, recorded March 11th, grantor. The estate of a doctor from Spokane, grantee, Wintersedge Holdings LLC, $1,240,000. Settlement statement from the actual title company, with a real file number, and a real escrow officer, whose name is Trish, and who was standing by the phone if anyone wanted to call her. And then Roz put down a single sheet of paper and said, "And this is the wire confirmation for the $980,000. Wendell and Loretta Hale sent on March 27th. It didn't go to a title company. There was no title company. It went here." My mother leaned forward in her white linen holding her flute and read the words Kestrel Ridge Ventures LLC. I watched her face. I watched it not understand and then start to, and then refuse. "Dashiell," she said. He was already moving. Not toward the door, toward the table, toward the papers, and Danny Weeks stepped out of the tent with an envelope and said, "Dashiell Hale," and Dash said, "What?" reflexively, the way everyone does, and Danny said, "You've been served," and put it in his hand and walked away. Simone was standing at the top of the driveway. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him. And that was when my brother stopped being charming. He came at me. Not a shove, not a threat. He came across that deck, with his fists closed and his face gone red and wrong, and he was shouting that I'd set him up, that I'd always been jealous, that I'd ruined everything, and a caterer dropped a tray. I didn't move. I'd known he'd do it. He was a man who had just lost, in 90 seconds, $1 million, a wife, and the only currency he'd ever had, which was other people's belief in him. He never reached me. 2 Kootenai County Sheriff's vehicles came down the gravel, and behind them a plain white Suburban and a silver sedan, and people in windbreakers with 3 yellow letters across the back came up my flagstone path, and a woman's voice said, "Dashiell Hale, FBI, hands where I can see them." Her name was Special Agent Priya Raghavan. She had been on the case for 11 days. She and Roz had talked 5 times. Somebody had gone to Curtis Yandel's house on Tuesday, and Curtis Yandel, notary, had folded in approximately 90 seconds, exactly as predicted, and had explained that Dashiell Hale had paid him $4,000 to stamp a document for a signer who was not present, and that he had a journal entry proving it because he was a bad criminal, but a compulsive record keeper. 61 guests stood on my deck holding champagne and watched my brother be handcuffed under the tent his mother had rented. Deputy Ochoa was there. He caught my eye across the yard for about half a second, and he did not smile, and he did not have to. They cleared the guests out in 20 minutes. Aunt Bev did not say goodbye to anyone. By 4 o'clock there was nobody left on that deck but my parents and me. The caterers were gone. The speaker had died mid-song. Somewhere in the house a phone was ringing, and nobody was going to answer it. My mother sat down on the deck boards. Not gracefully. Her linen pants went into a puddle of spilled champagne and she didn't notice. "He said it was in a trust," she said, to nobody. "He said the money was in a trust for us, and there'd be a distribution in the fall." My father stood by the railing with both hands on it, staring at the water, and he had aged about a decade since 2 o'clock. They had no house in Longmont. They had sold it in March, 31 years, and paid off the equity line, and the rest had gone to Cheyenne. They had my father's Social Security and a small pension from the flooring distributor and a Buick with 60,000 miles on it. That was the entirety of it. That was the whole life. My mother crawled. I want to be honest and say the word. She got on her hands and knees on my deck and came across it and took hold of the hem of my red dress with both hands and looked up at me with her mascara in tracks and said, "Maren, baby, you can't put us out. We have nowhere. You have 4 bedrooms. We're your family. Blood is thicker than water." And my father, the man who had never looked at me during a conflict in 39 years, my father got down on his knees on the boards beside her and looked at me. Finally, and said, "Please." I stood there. "I want to tell you what I felt." And it wasn't triumph. Everybody expects triumph. It was something much worse. It was a kind of grief that arrives about 40 years late, for a mother I never had standing right in front of me, ruined and still, negotiating. Because that's what she was doing, even on her knees. You have 4 bedrooms. I reached into the pocket of my coat, and I took out an envelope, and I crouched down so I was level with her, and I put it in her hands. Inside it was this: 90 days, prepaid, at a senior apartment complex in Longmont, Forum Fours from the church she'd played piano at since 1994. 2 bus tickets. The card of a nonprofit financial counselor who works with elder fraud victims. A letter from Roz explaining that they had a strong claim as victims in the federal restitution proceeding, and that they should absolutely cooperate with Agent Raghavan, and that they would not be charged. And one condition, typed one line: no contact, no requests, do not come here again. I had had that envelope in my coat for 6 days. I want that on the record too. I had it before the party. I had made the calls. I had paid the deposit with money I did not have, out of the $90,000 that was supposed to get me through a year of consulting. My mother read it. I watched her read it. Her eyes went down the page and stopped. And she said, "An apartment?" She said it the way she'd said find somewhere else to live. Her voice climbed. "It's a senior complex. With no. You have a guest house. You have that hole downstairs. I am not living in a box in Longmont while you sit up here on a lake." She threw it. Not far. It went about 2 feet and slid across the wet boards. My father didn't pick it up. He looked at her, and then at the envelope, and then at his own hands, and he didn't pick it up. So I did. I bent down and I picked it up and I wiped the champagne off it with my thumb, and I put it back in my coat pocket and I stood. "Okay," I said. And I walked down my own steps, past the tent, past the caterer's van in my flower bed, and out to the gravel road, where Estelle Pruitt was waiting with her hands in her cardigan pockets, and my dogs sitting at her feet. It rained that night, and then in the morning, early, it snowed. That first thin November snow that doesn't stick. I remember it because it was the first morning in 8 months I woke up without my chest hurting. My brother pled out 14 months later. 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft. 78 months in federal custody. The judge, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, who I will be grateful to until I die, ordered restitution of $1,342,000. And then he said, from the bench, before he sentenced him, that in 22 years he had rarely seen a defendant steal so comprehensively from the only people on earth who loved him without reservation. They recovered $480,000 from the cold wallet. Blockchain is a ledger. That's all it has ever been. My brother, who thought he understood money, had chosen the one place on earth where a transaction can never be unwritten. Simone got her divorce, and the college money, most of it. She sends me a photo of her kids every Christmas. Curtis Yandel lost his commission and did 11 months. My parents cooperated fully with Agent Raghavan and were never charged and received, eventually, a little over $300,000 in restitution, which is not enough to retire on and is more than nothing. They live in Longmont, not in the complex I paid the deposit on. That reservation expired, but somewhere. My father works 19 hours a week at a hardware store. He's 73 now. My mother gives piano lessons, again in someone else's front room, $30 an hour. They've written to me 4 times. I've returned every letter unopened. My handwriting on the front, return to sender. People ask me if that's cruel. I've decided I don't answer that question anymore. What I'll say is this: the envelope was real. It was in my coat, my hand was out. The hole in my wall is gone now. I hired a structural engineer out of Spokane and a contractor who has been building on that lake for 30 years. We did not rebuild the cedar knee wall. We put in 2 steel columns, hidden inside the posts, and above them a header rated for the whole ridge, and where my father's sledgehammer went through. There's a window now, 6 feet wide, 4 feet tall, facing straight west down the length of the water. Under it there's a bench with a cushion Estelle sewed. That's where I sit in the mornings. In the exact place they tried to break my house open, in the light. Estelle is 81 this spring. Her son flies in from Sacramento every August and mows her grass. She still won't let me pay for the sherry. And I never went back to Denver. I run a small consulting practice out of the room facing the lake, and I take about 9 clients a year, mostly small title agencies and 2 credit unions, and I teach them the 3 things. Check the dates, read the acknowledgement, follow the money to the escrow. It's less money than I made before. It's enough. Here's the part I didn't tell you, and it's the part I think about most. 4 days after they took my house, I figured out how Dash found me. He never told anyone, and it wasn't Google. It was a title data subscription from his old brokerage, a login nobody at that company ever bothered to shut off when his license lapsed in 2019. 5 years. He'd been paying nothing and holding a key to every property record in 11 states, and one afternoon he sat in a Panera in Boulder and searched Kootenai County for new cash transfers to LLCs whose registered agent was a Boise law firm, and there I was. Not because I'd been careless, because he'd been handed a key and never had to give it back. That was the story of his entire life, and it was the story of mine, and in the end it was the same key. Blood didn't build that house. 11 years of 80-hour weeks built it. Blood just showed up with a box truck and expected the door to be open. And here's the thing about doors, which I did not understand until I was 39 years old, standing in a red dress on my own deck with my mother's fists in my hem. You are allowed to close one. You're allowed to close it on people who share your last name, who taught you to ride a bike, who cried at your wedding. You're allowed to hold the door open exactly as far as you choose and no farther. And if they refuse to walk through it because the opening isn't grand enough for them, that refusal is theirs, not yours. It was never yours. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who'd put the kettle on. Have you ever had to close a door like that? Have you ever offered somebody the last thing you had and watched them throw it on the ground because it wasn't enough? Tell me. I read every one of these. And if this story reached you today, hit that like button and subscribe to Falcon Revenge, because there are more of these, and there are more of us. Your peace is not a spare bedroom. Stop letting people move into it.